Great. Well, that was really actually a really perfect introduction to this panel where we're going to discuss some of the policy responses towards AI. We got a few insights as to why there's such a big debate going on at the moment in public spheres, alongside new regulations coming out in certain jurisdictions, notably the European Union. But today here in this short panel, we wanted to have a little bit of a discussion about where this sits within the context of the mandate of central banks and financial services regulators more specifically, but also set it in the context of all of those other issues that were just outlined that go well beyond the mandate and remit of financial services institute authorities. So I'd like to hand over, first of all, to David. David also is not only a data scientist, but also formerly was at the MAS. So he's been on both sides of the fence. And I'd like to ask him to sort of start actually telling us what, structurally, what's different. Banks are already quite heavily regulated. Are these new risks, and how do we characterize them?
Well, first thing to say what's different is you have to think very hard to make sure that the response won't be generated by an LLM. So that's critically important now. But if you kind of look at it from 2 points of view, and I was listening intently in terms of what was going to describe in terms of the underlying risks. But perhaps in a bit of a devil's advocate attitude, I would argue from a policy perspective, there's nothing different. Because everything that was described, I would argue there isn't a single policy that doesn't already cover it in terms of fundamentally risk and how it should be addressed. What is, though, different is the realization of that underlying risk. So ironically, the responsibility, less to a certain extent, falls on perhaps regulators, if I'm fair, but on financial institutions saying, well, hold on a second. If I now create an AI-based lending algorithm, it still needs to fall down underlying practices from a credit risk modeling perspective. But fundamentally, there isn't a difference. And again, of course, there's nuances on the side. And concurrently to that, and I know this is a bit of a cop-out answer, but I think it's important to realize there is the difference. The difference is, and kind of setting it up in terms of from how it's looked at from an economic point of view. Now it becomes different. I mean, we've all heard, the monetization of data. I mean, if I had a penny each time I've heard, how do we monetize data? How do we look at data? What's the economic value of data? It's like the Pied Piper. We're all trying to find it, but yet it's exceedingly difficult. But the reality is there is an economic impact. And again, if I go back to what was shared earlier, an economic risk resulting in now attributed more in a kind of a direct relationship perspective in terms of data and how its data is being used. So no difference from a risk point of view, fundamentally, more of the actualization and implementation of it. And then the true risk is economic. The difference is economic.
Great. Okay, but that's very helpful. I mean, I think we struggle at the moment, I think, because this is still so nascent in many ways, on understanding what the impact is, not just on the risk side of things, as you say. Maybe there are lots of new tools or training aspects to approach, but also that broader macro and political economy effect. So what, I mean, in Cambodia, and then looking also at the region of ASEAN, what do you see as the mandate or the challenge for a central bank? But also, how does that mandate and the scope of the challenge relate to other government ministries or authorities?
All right. So first of all, I'm not a data specialist. I know very little about AI. And then when Nandu Mahanti invited me to speak here, I said yes immediately without knowing what I will be speaking about. I thought he would put me onto the payment because that's where my field of expertise is. But when I saw AI, I thought, So I attended a few of the sessions about AI yesterday, and I walked out completely confused. And luckily, my staff prepared me a whole text about AI, probably asking AI about AI. It's not too bad. So on that disclaimer, this is my take on AI. Now, personally, as a mother, I was helping my son doing his homework a couple of days ago on stoichiometry. Now, you can Google, because I Googled that word too. And it's about adding molecules together in an equation and try to balance the number of atoms. And as I was struggling to explain to him about this, my son just said, wait a minute, Mama, just go to ChatGPT. So he went to ChatGPT, asked the question, and immediately ChatGPT, within a few seconds, gave the whole answer with the reasoning behind this. And I said, great, fantastic. And at one point in time, ChatGPT gave something wrong. And I said, this is wrong. And your mother is never wrong. Check again. And so he checked again. And ChatGPT, mind you, apologized. Sorry, it was a mistake. So this should be the new answer. Now, this is scary because one, this machine acknowledged its mistake and apologized better than some human beings, I'm telling you. Second, it made mistake. And now if we were to venture into finance when it's about money, if this AI that we so rely on made mistake, there's no turning around. So as a regulator, well, as a mother, I'm happy there's ChatGPT, but as a regulator, I'm thinking, if it is about money, then it's dangerous. And so that's one for me as a regulator. Second is also about data. Countries like Cambodia, we are data scarce. Like it's an emerging economy. We don't have a lot of data. We were talking about, even in economic forecasting, my background in economist, it's very hard to get enough data set or historical data for us to make reliable forecasting. So when you talk about data, you need a lot of data for the machine to learn. And I was asking a bank, one of the biggest banks in Cambodia, who's trying to implement data, and they told me they need at least 5 to 6 years to build the data set in order to come out with a reliable data decision making from AI. So again, this is a challenge. Second is, prior to I was a chairperson of Credit Bureau Cambodia, and when I was on behalf of the National Bank, of course. And so we were discussing about the CEO at the time about how we can make better predictions on borrower behavior. We would look, and there was this things about looking into customer social media data, looking at how you write your caption, whether you use the right punctuation, whether you write the right the capital letters or not, and then come up with a sort of a decision making, saying whether you predicting your behavior, whether you're going to be a good borrower or not. And again, this is very dangerous, and thinking at the ethic, how much do I want to share my data, right? And I was so scared by this possibility now that when I write my caption, social media caption, I would read it twice or 3 times. So there's the ethic. Well, first there's the data scarce. There's the ethic part to it. There's also the privacy of it. How much do I want people to see this? And then yesterday we were discussing also is the talent, right? We as a regulator, we need to be able to validate those things. And we don't even know, as I admit, I don't know about AI, let alone the impact of AI. So I don't even know the definition AI. There's so many nuances. And David were coming out with a lot of acronym. I'm like, okay, right. So we don't know much. We are trying to find out what it is. But again, as I mentioned to you, there are some banks who are looking into it. I think we should learn by doing. As an emerging economy, we can't just sit and wait. We have to take the leap of faith. It's just like when Cambodia introduced blockchain payment technology, it's a leap of faith that we took.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, carrying on that theme, I mean, I know in Thailand, of course, there's been really quite amazing concerted efforts outside the financial sector. I'm thinking of the ETDA, the Electronic Data Authority, touching on the point you raised about needing data and actually helping to digitize the economy in order for some of these models to learn and be effective. How do you see that at the Bank of Thailand? Is that part of your strategy, or is that something that is covered by other institutions in government? Where does it fall within your mandate to take a role in promoting AI as well as managing the risks?
Thank you, Evan, and Ohayo gozaimasu. Always happy to be here in Japan, and so glad to ask me to be here. Pretty much the same. I didn't ask, what am I speaking on? I just said yes, but okay. AI actually, I don't know much about it. Economist by training, just in charge of this position my 6 months, but I have to say very exciting. and I've seen a lot going on. My governor put me as a head of AI task force in the bank just to force me, to do this thing, right? So it is a daunting task. And as Madam Governor was saying, that data is very key to have a successful AI strategy, right? Before I go into that, if I may share with you the big theme of our development of new technology and digital financial landscape. We had our own Bangkok Digital Finance Conference last year, and the theme is building an ecosystem for responsible innovation. And that theme carries on the three key directions, which is open data, open infrastructure, and open competition. These three opens continue to guide us towards this development of all the new technology, including AI, right? So our aim is we want to see the financial sector able to leverage on the technology and data to better serve the economy, not the other way around. So to drive innovation, to deliver better financial services. And our approach in dealing with the new technology has always been collaborative approach. We know that we can't do this alone. We definitely cannot. And so we ourselves, we ensure that we have an ecosystem, we have an infrastructure, we have a foundational layer that is can catalyze innovation, right? And then so that players have room to experiment with all this new technology. And the approach that we've been taking thus far is we have sandbox. Sometimes it may not go as fast as some private sector would have want. We keep it in the sandbox for too long. But in that sense, this year for the sandbox, we are enhancing it. We will allow unregulated activities to be tested. Previously, only regulated activities are allowed to be tested, right? So it's just the regulated activities with a new technology. But this year, we enhance it, and we will allow the testing of not yet permissible activities like tokenization, programmability of money, and so we hoping that that would introduce some new innovation into the system. We also plan to hold a public-private forum to explore the possibility to better utilize AI in financial services, and in particular the program, the project that we going to be our big project with the private sector is fraud detection and fraud prevention, and that is the big thing that we would like to see that project come to fruition, right? And that requires a lot of data, and not just data, it's data sharing, right? So each bank, having their own data cannot be as efficient in seeing the whole money trail of the system, or can. So that thing is that we think that's our role there, because the key enabler for AI is data, and in this space is our role to make sure that the trusted sort of data can be shared among players in a proper data governance, proper safeguard for privacy, for security, for everything. And that is the one thing that is in our strategic direction plan this year, to have an open data, open banking. And we will create common standards, common infrastructure to share data. And as some of you may know, that we are introducing the virtual banking later this year, introducing a new license. And that virtual bank would have no chance of surviving if data is limited and not shared.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, brings us to a couple of interesting points I wanted to ask Nicola. I mean, we've got lots of challenges just within the financial sector in mobilizing data and making it trusted, enabling it to be shared. But in Europe, I mean, we've got, 2 points I was hoping you could perhaps elaborate on, Nicola. One is that, of course, is there any sort of outline? This is often part of a much more comprehensive market development strategy. And most recently, what has drawn attention is the AI regulation that's come out in the European Union. And it'd be interesting to know what your perspective as the Bundesbank is on that piece of legislation, which is, outside the financial sector, but then how it relates to your mandate and that broader agenda and set of challenges that Dharani articulated.
Okay, thank you very much for your question, and also thank the organizers for inviting me. I shall say I speak in personal capacity. That's a disclaimer I give in advance always. I first wanted to make another point, if you allow me. We speak a lot about AI implementations and the challenges we have, and I do think, in fact, it's a little bit different from what you said. I think the models and the techniques are so advanced that it's really hard, from an operational risk perspective to do diligence on them. Yeah, so it's rocket science, more or less now. That's the one point I wanted to make. And the other point is you spoke about experimentation with those methods. I think we have to do this ourselves as central banks to learn. So there needs to be some playground prototyping and test driving within the walls of the central banks as well, because it will enable us to understand much better what's going on out there in the field, so to say. But when we do that, and when we implement to a larger scale AI methods in our institutions, we also need to change the way we work together. I think it really does change the institution after all. And we at the Deutsche Bundesbank just embarked on this journey, more or less. So to relate to your question, the AI Act, it's implemented across Europe, I think in about 3 years. It will sort AI models into 4 categories, from a very high risk category that will be instantly forbidden or after 6 months, which is social scoring, more or less. This is what you vividly explained with the social media scoring for other purposes than social media. And to a very low category where the companies can work on and model is like predictive maintenance and stuff like this, which the regulation doesn't see as too dangerous, apparently. And this act, whether it applies to you or not, forces you to really think about the technology, how you work with it, and also how transparent it should be. So the integrity standards for us as central banks are very high, especially if we apply the models. And you talked about data quality, for example, a key issue. So for the integrity of the replies of these models, because they hallucinate and so on and so forth, it's absolutely key to develop methods to really prove that the answers are correct, especially if they relate to regulation, for example, or some jurisdictive kind of information. And with that, I think we have extremely high standards we need to work on. Yeah. And also create transparency, because in Europe, we have the Freedom of Information Act, which is right next to the Data Protection Acts, more or less. And it allows the citizens to come to a public institution and to request information, including, and that's the fun part, or not, depends on the perspective, AI models. So if you used an AI model for specific purpose as an authority, public authority, the general public has the right to ask you what kind of model was it, on which data did you train it on, and so on and so forth. And then you need to, that's actually an extra pipeline, more or less, because you need to have specialists there replying to the questions of the public. So I leave it up to your fantasy to really think of good procedures that would allow for something like that. But I think in general, it will, also in other countries come to the forefront that people want to know what you're doing there. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So, that raises a general question to all of you. Each of you in your own way have highlighted how important it is to have approaches that in a way cross borders, either because the market is underdeveloped, or in the European Union context, there's a lot of debate about sovereignty of data. How do we coordinate in some of these issues that you've just raised in a transnational structure? Is this something that should be a priority, or how are you looking at international collaboration?
Can I probably take that up, because we have already made steps in the European Union, which is easier for us because we have the union, and there is legislation about access to financial data, as you might know, that is currently under discussion. And it will allow data subjects to give consent to have their data shared outside of the financial institutions where it is siloed in. So that's what we try to do in order to broaden the access to financial information. And the other kind of initiative that is there is the EU data spaces. You might have heard of them. So there are in 14 different kind of areas: manufacturing, energy, finance. And in that space, the European Union wants to activate the different kind of stakeholders, fintechs, regulators, other types of authorities and stakeholders to collaborate with each other. Academics, for example, to really develop good solutions in these data spaces with the focus on finance. So this is across the board collaboration and also across country collaboration.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important to, maybe I'll start with that element of, obviously it starts with information sharing, with open dialogue, discussions, and perhaps also an acknowledgement of what we don't know and what we're trying to figure out. I don't think we do enough of that. But perhaps if I peel a bit the onion, because I think it's critically important to listen to all the very, very important points, is we are all looking at it from different dimensions. And we're all solving slightly different problems, because AI is a phenomenally large umbrella. And it's now obviously exciting with, Gen AI, because I get asked like, David, what do you think about traditional AI? For example, from data governance. But again, what AI has resulted is an even higher criticality of the importance of data, which has always been there, BCP S239, et cetera, and so forth. But now you really have to care about it. In terms of the applicability of technology, where actually I will always continue with you that policymakers should not be technologists, because the irony of doing overly stipulated, like, David, this is how you should implement and you should do it, that's exactly how I can gamify it, because you're telling me what to do and I can work around it. But that's where the dialogue in terms of what is it that we're trying to solve? Like, it's rocket science. Great. So should we be talking about training to get more folks in the regulator to understand rocket science? So that is one of the key elements, going back to the question in terms of policy, because if otherwise we all have good intentions and we will miss the mark. For example, and again, just to bring it up, the EU Act in terms of AI, absolutely spiritually agree with it. But that particular point about social scoring will result in the banning of the usage of AI in countries who are currently developing. Because whatever you like to think of it, the moment you don't have a person with a credit information using alternative data, that is a social score, legally. So that's something that's really important. Bring it down. And what is it that we're trying to solve? What is the problem we're facing? And how do we share that internationally?
And building on that, I mean, you raised earlier, David, one other question that concerns everybody, I think, and you all highlighted your roles as economists and not as technologists, particularly, is what you were mentioning about the economic impact of AI. And in particular, I mean, these were quite explicit in some of the EU policy statements about creating less dependency or minimizing dependency on jurisdictions in a politically complicated world today. How does that fit into policy objectives? Do we have clear enough policy objectives, to your point? And how do you see those kinds of economic risks to your countries and maybe even the stability of the financial institutions?
I think on the macro level, AI has been talked in Thailand, at least. We talk a lot about AI replacing humans. But we, as a policymaker, wanted to look at it in terms of AI enhancing and empowering the workforce, right? There are tasks that AI can do better, and then we needed to reskill and upskill our workforce to be better and productive at doing other things that are not, manually repetitive and automated by that. And also in terms of using it to enhance our own capability, right? Artificial intelligence can complement human intelligence in lots of ways, right? So in that sense, the shift to look at it for more of a benefit, potential socio-economic benefits to Thailand is look at in terms of it more benefits than risk in that sense. And for financial sector in particular, we at this juncture we focus more towards greater AI adoption in the financial sector rather than imposing any stringent regulations on it. That would be at the very back of our mind, even though it introduces new risks and some amplify the risk that we already know. But with the current stage of the adoption, most of the adoption in Thailand banking sector is more or less still within the bank, not customer facing yet. Right? So, and we ourselves also experiment, as Nicola was saying, that we also have our own in-house data scientists looking at developing our own LLM to help with the search engine kind of, search information and questions and answering thing in the form of the Gen AI. So it helps to enhance the productivity of the staff, making Gen AI, making this technology democratizing, socializing to the general staff that can help better. So in that sense, we see more of it benefits than risk. I know that maybe you're trying to get to like some Gen AI that using in investment vehicle, right? And then maybe destabilizing the markets. That also need to be monitored. But still, yeah.
I think for the economic impact, I've no doubt it's going to be very positive. It's the social impact that we don't know and the risks that come from this. So we need to be very careful, right? Now, I just wanted to go back on the cross-border data sharing. I think it's going to be very difficult for countries to share this data. I tried to work when I was with the credit bureau to do cross-credit information, cross-border sharing with Singapore, and it took us 7 years. It happened eventually, but it took a long time for both authorities to understand what are the process. Now imagine Singapore is one of the most, open markets in the region. So I think we need to sit together and discuss about what we want to share, what we don't want to share. And most importantly, I mentioned about talent. Not every regulator in the region has the capability to understand all this. And so when you don't understand, you tend to preserve, you tend to sort of keep it to yourself. And so this is why we need, to have some standard sectors to help us understand, but also tell us, okay, this is, what is done in the European Union. Maybe you could also apply this in ASEAN and adapt it to such and such. So really, I think there's no sort of best practices in terms of AI governance yet. And I hope it will come eventually with the BIS, from the BIS or whoever who's willing to work on it.
But that's a good point to end on a little bit is this question, David raised, because it's such an overarching issue. We're often, we've kind of put you on the spot as representatives of central banks, but there are lots of other authorities, some of which don't even exist yet, or they're just being put into creation. So what briefly have you learned, or what kind of lessons do you think people can take away here about how to organize the mandates of different parts of government, and how they may need to be coordinated in future to bring in the talent from the private sector, to your point?
I'll go quickly first. Dialogue is important. Talk to us. We don't know everything. And again, something I used to raise as an example, and I say it because I'm a mother and I'm a woman, so I can afford to say this. The time when I was raised by my parents, they tell me exactly what I need to do. Very instructive. You go to this school, do this job, study this. And I realized that this is not how my children, I'm raising my children. They know much better than I do. They have access to so much information. So maybe in the past, you used to follow exactly what the regulator tell you to do, but now tell us, explain to us what is it that you want to do, because obviously we have our mission, our vision to achieve. You also have your objective, and we need to align those. We need to understand. If otherwise, as I said, if I don't know, I'll just say no. Let's keep it to ourselves.
I directly relate to this because I like this a lot. It would be sort of agile regulation, but it's true nowadays it's different. And I like the statement you made about dialogue. I think this is absolutely key. Also as well as the role of a central bank to create a conducive environment for fintechs. Absolutely, to thrive and to experiment with the different kind of technologies they have and to probably rock the marketplace. You can do that via different ways. Innovation challenges, hackathons, dialogue, stakeholder, networking, and so on and so forth. I think these are key in order to master the challenges together.
I second on it, and what Governor and Nicola was saying. And as YPs were saying earlier, that the exciting thing is that regulators are at the forefront. We want it. My biggest fear is our regulation is unintentionally hold back the industry from doing good to the society. So we don't want to be too conservative. And at the same time, I need to say, the risks that come with it. We don't know what we don't know. So the unknown things are quite scary. So dialogue is very important.
Perhaps not coming from agencies and all that, but having been on the regulator side and now paying for my sins, not kidding, on the industry, in all candidacy, what I think is really important, and I'm really building on that point, and you don't know what you don't know, and there's a change in the reality. I got 5 kids, so boy, do they not they listen. There is a need for and I hate this term, but it really is, there is a need for a safe space between industry, financial institutions, and regulators. Believe it or not, they hold back a lot in what they tell you. And right or wrong, and because I've been in situations whereby, why did you tell this to the regulator? It's just simple of like, I don't know, or the failures, what doesn't work. This needs to have something to thought about of how this kind of environment, by this open conversation, can happen in order to result in better policies, in better refinements in regulation, and an understanding of actually why am I preventing myself from doing work because I think the regulator does. The number of times I've been in those conversations, the regulator doesn't allow it. Like, where? Literally, where does it say that the regulator doesn't allow it? In the end of the day, on certain aspects, when it's a regulated space, when it's a known space, when it's a new area, manage your risk, essentially. So I would kind of end with that advocacy, just like in cross-border, inter-border, there is genuine dialogue necessary, especially at the adoption of cutting edge and perhaps even less cutting edge underlying technologies.
Great. Well, I mean, I think we've ended really on the right note about dialogue then, because all the more reason for us all to have been here. The only thing I think that came out common across the board was that we probably should have invited a few teenagers to tell us what we don't know and see what they're holding back. But I'd like to give the audience here an opportunity to applaud for the speakers and really thank everybody for a very vibrant dialogue.